Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy and welcome to our empty kitchen set. This is what it is like before we dress it and make it nice for whoever is cooking and shooting in here. And today I'm going to use this set to show you how to match these two cameras. Here I have a Blackmagic URSA Broadcast G2, and here I have a Panasonic UE150. And I'm going to take you through matching these cameras step by step. I'm sure you've seen the duration of the video. It's rather long, but you can take on as much of it as you want at any time. I want to tell you why I'm using my phone to record this, why I don't think that this video has been made before, and also what are the steps? How do you actually do this? Well, first, I'm using my phone because I'm going to go between the studio and our MCR pretty much all day. Second, why don't I think this video has been made before? Well, there are quite a few videos on post-production color, but not many on live color, and that's because each situation is different. It's actually somewhat difficult to teach this for an outdoor situation, an indoor studio situation, and everything in between. But I'm going to at least try, and if you have a different way that you like to do something, please let us know in the comments, because everyone's situation can teach you something quite different about this. Now, what are the steps that I'm going to do? Well, first, I'm going to show you how to set up your environment for camera matching. Then I'm going to go through the steps on how you would camera match for each camera. And then I'm also going to show you how to create a LUT inside DaVinci Resolve to go the extra step. I think that by the end of this, you're going to understand how to get a really good camera match in camera without needing to do post, and it's going to look great on your streams or broadcasts. So let's get started by first setting up our environment. When you're matching your cameras, you need to set your environment up for success first. Right here, I have a DSC Labs Chroma Dumont chart. This is the 12x4. I would love to have one with more colors, but I'm doing something a little bit simpler and a little bit mid-tier here. We do have bigger ones, and then there are a lot of even cheaper ones on this. It's really nice to have one that's actually supported by DaVinci Resolve. This one's actually not supported by DaVinci Resolve for automatic matching, so if you're looking to get a chart, look into that. That's a nice little feature to have at your disposal. The next thing I did is I white balanced all my lights. Now, you might be thinking that that sounds a little counterintuitive, but the reality is that for these Astras, these 1x1 panels that I have here, they need to be set at 5200 Kelvin, while my Studio X4s need to be set at 5600 Kelvin for them to match. And let's not worry about what that's going to be in the cameras yet. We're going to figure that out later. But the important thing is that you're dealing with lights that match very well and all are giving off the same color temperature. Next, I have my cameras over here. Now here I have my Blackmagic Broadcast G2, and here I have my UE150, and over there is a Pocket 6K. Don't worry about that for now, I'm not using it. And then I want to show you what I have set up on the camera here. I am in my video dynamic range, and I'm shooting 29:9:7, but this is a frame rate agnostic setup here. And then I have the chip chart almost entirely in the frame. There we go. I just had to nudge it a little bit. That's pretty important to have your chip chart fill out the frame. It's not absolutely required, but it makes this a lot easier. If you can't fill out your frame with a chip chart, I recommend putting some black duvetine, something behind it so that your scopes don't have a bunch of color outside of the chart. My UE150 here, I'm going to control in my control room, which I'll take you to in just a second. The other thing that it's really nice to have handy is behind this chip chart, I have a piece of white paper, which I'm actually going to flip over right now. You can actually white balance without a piece of white paper, but I'm going to do a demonstration that's going to use the white paper, so I'm going to put that over. And it's also really good to have lens caps nearby. So this is the lens cap for the Broadcast G2, and that is going to help us with black balance later. So it's good to have this nearby. And that's the setup. So let's go over to the control room, and I can show you what I have there. In the master control room here, I have a lot of tools at my disposal. I want to explain what I'm using. Here I have a PTZ controller from Panasonic. Here I have the computer that's going to run my ATEM software control, which does control my camera shading settings. It's also going to have the web backend of the UE150, which is a much easier way to actually show how that works. Here I have a multi-view, which you will be able to see with a couple different scopes in both cameras. And then here I have a hardware control panel for the switcher that I'm using, because having a quick switching between the cameras is really important when you are matching them. I'm gonna put my phone down here, and now I'm gonna show you what I have on the computer here, more in depth. So my ATEM software control allows me to control the URSA, and I have just my primary color wheels. In order to get to this, you go to the camera settings, and then you click this expand button, and that gets you the full color wheels here. These are primary color wheels that you might be familiar with in DaVinci. The primary color wheels don't give you as much in-depth control as you might be used to, but that's because it gives you a more natural look. So I'm somewhat limited in my control here on the ATEM, especially when you compare it to the UE150s, which gives you a brightness, a picture, and a matrix control. So I've done my best to get close to default settings for both of our cameras. I am just going to scroll through to show you my settings here. I'm not going to go through in depth. And also, some of these might not actually be the default settings. I didn't reset everything because that would take forever. Ultimately, this is not a demonstration of how to nail the detail on your UE150. And one thing that I have noticed here is that my master pedestal needs to be reset to 0. So I'm going to do that here, 0. And then my chroma level, I'm also going to put on 0. And now this is pretty much set. So let's start out with step 1, white balance. Your white balance is really just the color balance of your whites, of your highest levels. And in order to understand that, let's bring you over to the scopes, because I think that there's some misconception about what this actually means. I'm going to put my URSA up here, and you can see on the parade there that there are different levels of red, green, and blue present, even though this should be white. And on the Vectorscope, you'll see the same. It's not on the middle dot. In order to demonstrate how this Vectorscope works a little bit better, I'm actually going to go over to a color generator on my ATEM controller here. And let's switch this over to color 1 on the output. So now my parade RGB and my Vectorscope are getting my color generator here. If I turn the luminance all the way up, the saturation all the way down on my color generator, I have pure white. And you can see those 3 lines on the top of the parade there. Those are what pure white looks like. You can see that the red, green, and blue are all the same, and they're all at 100% IRE. That is the 100% IRE line. If I go to pure black, now they are all at 0 IRE. That's what 0 looks like. And the Vectorscope has no saturation at all, so you won't see anything there. And as you might guess, if I go to 50% luminance or something close to it, now I'm in the middle. So that's 50% IRE. IRE is how we measure luminance, and it is going to be something that I reference quite often here. So now that you know what this would look like ideally, let's do a practical white balance here. I'm going to manually do this on my URSA Broadcast G2 here, and I'm going to automatically do it on the UE150. The first thing is that those are not bright enough to be white. So I know that my camera gain needs to be +4. I did a little bit of work on this before. Ideally, this would be 0 dB of gain, but I know in order to do that, I'm going to have to make the lights really bright in the studio. It's not going to be comfortable as the subject in the studio. So I'm going to land on +4 there. I did that before the video here. And the other thing you'll notice is that we have camera sensor gain and then gain here, which is what the primary wheels are, it's white. It's the brightest part of the image. I'll be using gain in both ways. You'll just have to follow along contextually what I mean. So I'm going to turn up my gain here so that these get a little bit closer to 100% IRE. I'm not going to get them all the way to 100 for practical reasons that I'll talk about a little bit later. And then I'm going to use my color balance, or my white balance here, to get these lines a little bit closer to even. Increase the gain a little bit more. And there we go. Do a little bit more color balance. And you can see I had it at 5600 because that's what I set my lights to, but that's not how the sensor's reading it. And that's totally okay. As long as we get it to read white here, we're good. The other thing I noticed here is that The green is a little bit lower than the blue and red, so I'm going to go into my gain color here, and I'm just going to bring the red down a little bit, and I'm going to do the same for blue. You might be tempted to add green. It's best to try to leave the green control alone, at least that's the way I've always done it, and just use red and blue. If you deal with a lot of other camera controllers, that's pretty consistent, is that you just control the red and the blue, and the green follows. That looks like a good white balance on the URSA. I'm going to use my auto white balance on my UE150, so I'm going to switch to UE150 there. These are also not white. Now on this, I'm actually going to use my iris in order to do that. I'm just going to open up the iris on this camera a little bit. I didn't open up my iris on my Broadcast G2 because it was already pretty open, and I don't want too shallow of a depth of focus there, so that's just a practical decision that I made there. And I'm going to auto white balance that one more time. That's pretty close for now. And if I switch between my UE150 and my URSA, you can see that my white levels are the same. The Vectorscope there looks like they're in the middle as well. Maybe a little bit of shift there, but let's do a black balance before we go on. Now, I'm going to show you how to do this on the UE150 first. You just hit the auto black balance button. It blacks it out, and then, I actually didn't have it on program there, blacks out the lens, it covers the lens for you, and it balances your black levels. I don't have that on the URSA, so I'm actually going to physically go and cap it. While I do that, I want to talk to you about black balance. Black balance is something that a lot of cameras don't give you access to, but it's really important. It's really important that your low IRE values also don't have any color shift on it. So in order to do this, I'm just going to put a cap on the camera here to black out the sensor. And now when I go back to my Vectorscopes, I want to make sure that when it is black, it is at 0 IRE or very close to it. There's some practical limits to why you might not want to do that. So I'm going to go to my controller here. I'm going to switch the URSA onto program there. And look at that. There's a little bit too much green and not enough blue or red in my lift. So lift is what they call black here. So I actually think that the levels are good there, but I need to add a little bit of red there, and add a little bit of blue there. And I'm just going to raise the lift a little bit so we can make sure that that's accurate. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And I know that the green level, you're actually seeing some noise there. Narrower lines are better, it means less noise, but I'm just gonna do that for now. All right, so now I have my black balance on my camera, and I'm gonna go uncap it. So I'll be right back while I do that. I'm back. As you might imagine, I could have also done some iris controls here. I just wanted to leave that, and it's nice if you have a camera operator manning that camera. So let's go back to my UE150 here, and this is something I want to do. I want to auto white balance one more time after you black balance. It's good to white balance again. That looks pretty good. And then same with my URSA. After I black balance, I want to make sure my white balance is still good, and it is. Excellent. So now we are white balance and we are black balance. I'm going to go an extra step and see if my gray is looking good as well. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to the UE150 here, and I'm just going to close the iris of my UE150 until it's around gray. This is just a good thing to check. And that gray looks really good. I'm going to open the iris back up here. And then same on my URSA here. I'm going to go to my controller here. This is how I control iris. I'm going to lower the iris until it's gray, and look at that. The gamma here, that's how we're going to adjust this, needs to be adjusted a little bit. So I'm going to lower the blue on the gamma here, and I'm going to do the same with the red. Just a little bit of an adjustment, and then I'm going to use this wheel here to make them all there. I'm going to be doing a lot of gamma adjustment later, so I'm not too worried about getting them all perfect. I just want to make sure that when I'm at 50%, it's about the same. Cool. So now I'm going to raise that iris back up until it's where white was. And we are right about there. So now I'm done with my white balance and my black balance, and I checked gray just to be safe. Now I'm going to go and flip the white paper away from my card so that we can start doing exposure with the proper chip chart. So I'm going to go do that right now. I'll be right back. So I'm here to dial in my color, but in order to do that, I need to get my exposure right first. So before I go into color, I need to do exposure. And the grayscale levels in the middle of the chart are what helps me do that. That is what the X's are that you see. Those X's are going to help me get my exposure. So I'm going to start with the UE150, which is what you see here on the scopes. And I'm going to go to my brightness first and make sure that all of this is set up correctly. So my shutter is where I want it to be. And my f-stop is at f5.6 right now, which you can't see here, but I can see that on my controller. And now I'm going to go over into my picture. And this is where I'm going to start dealing with pedestal and gamma. Pedestal is going to be the black levels, and gamma is going to be the midtones. Ideally, that X in like a perfect scientific world would be straight up 100 IRE to 0 IRE. However, I know that that's impractical for my setup. I want to leave some room. I have, for example, some metal in my kitchen set that white is not going to represent. White is actually going to be not as bright as metal reflecting lights would be. So I want to be able to have a little bit of room there, and that's very common in any setup. So I'm going to shoot for a little bit above 0 and below 100 here. So I'm going to start by opening up my iris a little bit more so that I can get the tops of the X's a little bit closer. That's good for now. Now I'm going to go to my master pedestal, which is right there. And I'm going to drop my master pedestal, which are my black levels, until those X's get closer to 0. And I think I'm happy with that for now. And now the middle of the X's, as you can see there, is above 50 IRE. So I'm going to go to my gamma. I'm going to increase my gamma until those are closer. All right, I'm pretty happy with that exposure level for now. Let's go to my URSA, and then I will come back once I need to actually match them. My URSA, as you're gonna see here, is a kind of a mess. So I'm gonna start here with the contrast and putting this above 50%. Contrast, when you have it on a Blackmagic camera, gives you a little bit more control with the pivot. So I'm going to do this before I start touching my primaries here. I'm gonna go there. I already set my gain when I did my white balance, so I'm gonna leave that there for now. I'm going to start adjusting the lift to get that down to 0. I think I went too much with my contrast. And now I'm going to adjust my gamma to try to get the center of the X at 50. That's much better. So now I'm between my URSA and my UE150. URSA, UE150. And there are a lot of differences there. The first thing is that my URSA has a lot more contrast in it right now. The blacks are more black. I actually like that. So I'm going to go to my UE150 and I'm going to decrease the pedestal a little bit until it gets a little bit closer. I like that level. And then something else I've noticed is that the midtones on the URSA are too hot. So I'm going to go to my gamma, bring that down. And the spread of that X is a little bit too much. So I'm going to decrease the contrast a little bit here. There we go. And the reality is that these are two different sensors and the X's are not going to be perfect. I at least want to make sure that the mids, the highs, and the lows are very close. So 0, 50, and 100 should all be very close. All right, there's my UE150, and there's my URSA, UE150 URSA. The URSA has a little bit too, it's a little bit too black there for my taste. There we go, and then I have to compensate with a gamma adjustment. That's looking pretty good. The URSA is still a little bit more black, so I'm going to make that adjustment on the UE150 for now and go down a little bit more on my master pedestal and a touch more on my gamma as well. I'm going to bring the gamma back. I'm going to raise my black level a little bit more. I'm going to just adjust this number here. It's very touchy, very precise. There we go. And now I'm going to go back on my gamma on the URSA to compensate. You can see that these all play with one another. You adjust one and something else changes. So here on my URSA, I can tell that my green, red, and blue on my my lift need to be adjusted a little bit more. I'm going to raise the red just a touch, and then lower it all. There we go. My UE150 looks good. I do notice that the URSA has a little bit too much red in the gammas there. Did lower the red level on the gamma there, which did a little bit to the lift, so I'm going to raise the lift red level. There we go, and I feel very good about that. So now that I have this going with my exposure, I've just been looking at the parade so far. I need to now use the Vectorscope. Now, two things about a Vectorscope. My Vectorscope needs to be set at a 2x Vectorscope zoom for my chart. That's actually illustrated on the chart. It says 2x color zoom on it. That's going to get my lines to be much more accurate and much more like the correct amount of saturation. That's what I'm trying to say. My URSA here, the first thing I notice is that I'm overshooting my targets. I need to be in that first ring of targets, so I'm going to turn down my saturation until I get closer. There we go. And then the other thing I see is that my skin tones are too far over into the magenta. So I might do an overall tint adjustment here. That's going to do a little bit to affect like the overall adjustments I made here, but I'm okay with that for now because right now I'm looking at my skin tones, which is that line that you see there. In my gamma, I, on the skin tone line, see that it's shifting a little bit magenta, so I'm actually going to add back a little bit of green there, which is going to look a little bit like that. So I'm going to go there. And that is what my URSA is going to be. I'll go into a little bit more detail on how you can get this hitting those marks perfectly later, but for now, I'm happy with my URSA. I'm going to go to my UE150 now. So in order to get there, I'm going to go to my matrix and set this to a user matrix. I have a linear matrix here and then a color correction here. Linear matrix is what I'm going to start with because it's a little bit more gentle and will introduce less noise. And then I'm going to color correct to dial it in even more. This is a finicky process that you're going to see me start to do here, but I'm probably going to fast forward this once I start going. So I want to go around and around in a wheel, and you will see that it's not like taking one color and placing it there. That's what color correction does, but like I said, I don't want to do too much of that yet. I'm going to focus on getting my red, my magenta, and my blue to all hit their marks, and then I want to get the yellow, green, and cyan on the correct axes, but I don't, for this camera at least, for this setup, I don't want those to hit their marks perfectly. It's going to do some weird things with skin tones if I do that. And that's pretty consistent around a lot of different cameras. So I'm just going to get this roughly in. So here's where I got with the linear matrix. These are the settings that work for this camera in this environment with these lights. Yours will be different, But the point that I wanted you to get from that is that with a linear matrix, you go slowly in a circle, you get your control, but everything depends on everything else. So if you go too far in one direction with one setting, it's going to mess up your calibration for all the others. So go nice and slow, go in a circle, go down and back until you get something that slightly resembles a more ideal vectorscope. Now I'm going to use the color correction to nail this. I have my saturation and my phase that I have for each color. So here we have red, yellow, cyan, blue, magenta, and I skipped green. And if you have a different chart, your vectorscope's going to look different than this. I would love to have more colors with a more dense color chart, but I'm just going to use what I have here. And I am going to go with my 6 primaries here. So I'm going to go to red, not primary colors, but my six points here that I'm trying to hit. So I'm going to decrease my saturation on my red. That's just where I'm starting somewhat arbitrarily here. And I'm going to shift the phase there. That looks good. Now I'm going to go to magenta, and I need to add a little bit of saturation to magenta. That looks good. And then I'm going to add a phase. Now, I just want to show you what happens if you go too far. I'm at 4 here with magenta. Let's say I go too far, and you see how that starts to flatten out? That's what noise looks like on a vectorscope. So when you're doing these, you have to be gentle with it. You don't want to color correct too much here, and if you have to do too much here, you probably didn't do enough in your linear matrix, so you want to go back to that. And now I'm going to deal with my yellow, my skin tones, and my red, and spread these out a little bit more. My skin tones are too far above the skin tone line there, and my yellow is hovering on the wrong axis. This is going to take a little bit of work, and this is something I've noticed with this UE150. So I need to use the yellow green, I need to bump that down, and then I need to use the yellow and bump that down. There we go. And now I'm going to do a little bit of work on my skin tones here, which are these red, yellow, yellow, red, yellow, and red, red, yellow. You need to be careful with these because skin tones, our eyes know if they're off. So you want to make these accurate, but you also don't want to be too harsh here. You don't want to do too much surgery on this or it's going to start looking pretty weird. I'm going to adjust all of their phase so that they're a little bit closer on the vectorscope. Those different dots actually represent different skin tones of different complexions at different saturation levels, but you'll see that they're all right around the same level, and that's because our skin tones actually all pretty much fall along that skin tone line, just at different saturation levels, which is a pretty cool thing there. And this is what a pretty good, quick UE150 color match looks like. I'm sure that there is some more detail I could go into. At any point in time you could do that, but just for our video here, I'm pretty happy with it. So I've just shown you how to match charts decently well, but that does not mean that this is going to look good once we widen out the camera, get someone standing in there, and actually have to shoot something practical here. So what I'm going to do is get someone to stand in, because ultimately the skin tone lines on a chart are one thing. Actually getting someone in there and looking natural, that's another one. So let's go to the next step now. Now I've widened out our frame and I have Nicole standing in here. And what you'll notice, and what I immediately notice, is that first, her skin looks a little bit brighter. The highlights look a little bit brighter on the URSA than on the UE150. The cast that they both have in their midtones is a little bit different. The UE150 here has a little bit more yellow than the URSA does. So those are a couple changes I'm going to make. And then I also just noticed that the exposure is a little bit different between them. So I'm really going to focus on the contrast here and just try to dial this in a little bit better. So I'm going to start with the URSA, and you can choose whichever one you want to adjust to the other. I'm going to adjust the URSA to the UE150. I actually think the UE150 looks a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to start by actually increasing the lift just a little bit on the URSA. And this is going to be very, very finicky. This whole process is going to be pretty finicky. So I'm probably not going to do this all live with you. I'm going to get us started here. Go down a little bit of gain there. I felt like some of what I was dealing with was just focus differences, and I wanted to see a little bit more of the frame, so I widened out both cameras a little bit more so I could detect a few more differences. And now, about 10 minutes later, to my eyes, just doing a quick color match here, these look really similar. And there are differences, but a lot of those differences, in my opinion, can be chalked up to just the fact that these are actually different sensors. These are different lenses, different brands, right? So as far as matching two different brands, two very different types of cameras with the tools that are built into them, I'm really happy with this. So now, I'm going to do a little bit of extra credit and show you how to create a LUT inside DaVinci Resolve. Now that I'm already done with my grade, I don't want to go too far, but using Resolve, I can get the URSA to have some similar settings as the UE150 gives me just in the camera control. So let's do that now, and then we will see how close we can get once we use all of the tools at our disposal. This isn't necessarily something that you will want to do if you are doing a lot of dynamic changes, like let's say for an outdoor music festival, you might not want to mess with a LUT because things are going to be changing a lot over time. But in my studio environment, that's not really the case. I don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to create a LUT, but be very careful here. Just like the color correction section of the UE150, if you go crazy here, it's going to start introducing noise or looking unnatural. So do your best to do as much as you can inside the ATEM software controller, and when in doubt, do less. Just do less and try not to introduce unnatural noise or an unnatural look. So I went into DaVinci Resolve, which is a free software. I'm using the free version here, and I brought in recordings of the last thing I did in the camera, and then I zoomed them back in so that I have a nice view of the color chart and Nicole here. And ideally I would have just zoomed in a little bit, but I forgot. So transform will do for now. And this is going to give me a good look at the color chart and the skin tones here. I'm going to go into the color section here, and let's look here. We have our UE150, which looks pretty accurate here, and then we have our URSA Broadcast G2. In order to do this, I popped open the curves section, and I'm going to be using the hue versus hue and the hue versus saturation curves. What I will do here is click on hue versus hue, and I'm going to click on the primary colors here that I need. So I'm going to click on yellow, and I'm going to delete the extra nodes here by right-clicking. I'm going to click on red, and I'm going to delete the extra nodes here. My red is right on the border here. Next, I'm going to click on magenta. Then I'm going to click on my blue. Then I'm going to click on my cyan. And finally, green. Excellent. Now I'm going to do the same for hue versus saturation. And now we have the same thing for both. So I am going to take it color by color, just like I did when I was doing the UE150's color correction. And I'm going to start with red. I notice here that the red dot is a little bit oversaturated. So I'm going to take the red here and just duck it a little bit on hue versus saturation. That's as much as I want to do. Then I'm going to go to magenta. The primary problem with magenta here is that I need to change its hue. So I'm going to take the magenta hue, and this is hue versus hue, so I'm going to shift the hue, and I'm going to shift it clockwise there. Counterclockwise, or clockwise there, which was the wrong place here. There we go. And then I'm going to also increase the saturation just a touch. And let's compare this to my UE150. Much closer. I need a little bit more saturation on the magenta there. All right, that's a nice light touch. Let's move on to blue. So I'm going to add a green cyan node, which will be right here. Get rid of these in-betweeners here and just make a little hue adjustment there. And I'm going to do the same with the saturation. I'm going to go to my green cyan, delete those. I'm deleting those because I don't want to get too surgical about it. I actually want a big continuous wave here to keep it looking natural. There we go, that's very close. Okay, now moving to my yellow. And finally, the skin tones. And you can see that the skin tones is perhaps the biggest difference here. Okay, so I am going to just click on her skin tones here. I'm gonna do hue versus hue. I'm just gonna click there. And that's going to give me this spike here. And then I'm going to rotate them in the direction. This is, again, where you wanna be very, very careful not to create any unnatural artifacts here. I'm gonna do the same for her saturation here. I need to increase the saturation just a touch. A little bit more. There we go. That is much, much closer. That looks pretty good to me. So I am going to go here on the clip that I just was doing these adjustments on, and I'm going to generate a LUT. I'm going to generate a 33-point cube here. And I am going to save this to an SD card. So here I have that SD card. I'm going to call this V4 LUT. And this is going to be corrected. You can name it whatever you like. And I'm going to save that. And I'm going to pull this SD card out and take this to my camera. In case you haven't generated a LUT before, I'm going to put my SD card into one of the SD card slots on my camera here. I'm going to go to LUTs, and I'm going to click this button here, import LUT, and I'm going to click on my V4 LUT corrected. I'm going to import that, and then I'm going to click on it and enable. Now I want to go to my monitor and make sure my 3D LUT is on. In this case, I'm using my front SDI or my main SDI. Make sure that is enabled so that it is applied on your SDI output. And we're back with the LUT applied. This is the Broadcast G2. This is the UE150. The UE150 is all in body. The Broadcast G2 is in body with a LUT. UE150, Broadcast G2, and back and forth. If this video helped you, please leave a like. I know it was a little bit long, but I hope that you got a good idea for the process and how you might apply it for your situation. Speaking of your situation, what would you do differently, or what experiences have you had that might change, especially outside of a studio environment like this? Please let us know in the comments below. In the meantime, thank you for watching, thanks for your participation, and we'll see you next time.